All right. Hey, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Always exciting to be back.
So this time we're diving into something that you guys have been requesting a ton lately.
Oh, yeah.
The 80-20 rule, sometimes called the Pareto principle.
hmm
We are going to be looking at the book Living the 80-20 Way by Richard Koch.
Excellent book.
Yeah, have you had a chance to check it out?
I have, yeah. It's a classic for a reason.
Yeah, it's one of those that seems like everyone's heard of,
Right.
but maybe not everyone has actually dug into.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So we're going to do that today. And specifically what we're going to be talking about is how can you use the 80-20 rule to improve pretty much every area of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really the core premise of the book, right? Is that this principle it applies across the board.
Yeah. So for anyone who's not familiar with it,
Right.
can you kind of give us the quick rundown?
Sure, yeah. So the basic idea is that 80% of your results come from just 20% of your efforts. Now, those numbers, they're not always exact, right? Sometimes it might be 70-30 or 90-10, but the general principle holds true across a wide range of areas.
So what are some examples from the book that really stood out to you?
Well, Koch, he gives a bunch of different examples, but some of the ones that I found most interesting were, in the realm of work, 80% of your success might come from just 20% of the tasks that you do.
Oh, interesting.
80% of your happiness could come from 20% of the activities you engage in.
Wow.
80% of your income might come from 20% of your skills or clients if you're running a business.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like you could be spending all this time on all these different things, but just a small fraction of those are actually moving the needle.
Exactly. And that's really where the power of this principle lies, is in identifying and focusing on that critical 20%.
So it's not about working harder or longer.
Yeah.
It's about working smarter.
Yeah, exactly. It's about being strategic about where you direct your energy and attention.
So how do we actually go about doing that? How do we figure out what that 20% is for us?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And Kof, he suggests a few different approaches. One is to really look at your past experiences. What have been the things that have consistently led to the most success or the most fulfillment for you?
Oh, okay.
And then from there, you can start to see some patterns emerge.
Gotcha. So it's like looking back and seeing what's worked before
Exactly.
and then trying to double down on those things.
Right. And another approach is to experiment.
Okay.
Try focusing on a specific area for a set period of time and track your results.
Mhm.
See what kind of impact it has. And if it turns out to be part of that high impact 20%, then you can continue to prioritize it.
So it's like a combination of looking at what's worked and then also being willing to kind of test new things out and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the things that people struggle with is, they get caught up in the urgent tasks, the things that are right in front of them, and they lose sight of the bigger picture.
Right. And I think that's where this principle can be really helpful because it forces you to step back and say, okay, what are the things that are truly going to move the needle in the long term?
And maybe those aren't always the things that are screaming for our attention right now.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, you know, Koch, he talks about this in the context of work and productivity, but it also applies to things like personal relationships and finances and even health.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, he really emphasizes that it's a universal principle.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely noticed this in my own life. I could spend hours and hours working on a project
Right.
and feel like I'm making progress, but then when I actually step back and look at it,
Yeah.
it's maybe only a small portion of what I did actually mattered. The
hmm
rest was just kind of busy work.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about some of the specific takeaways from the book.
Okay.
What are some of the key things that people can start doing today to apply this principle in their own lives?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways, I think, is this idea of focusing on the few things that matter.
Okay.
So whether that's in your work, identifying those high impact tasks, or in your personal life, figuring out what activities bring you the most joy and fulfillment,
hmm
it's about really honing in on those things and letting go of the
So
rest.
it's simplifying and prioritizing.
Exactly.
And he also talks about time management, right? How the
Yeah.
80-20 rule can help us be more effective with our time.
Yeah, he challenges this traditional notion of having a long to-do list
Right.
and try and get everything done.
Checking off every single box.
Yeah, and instead he suggests focusing on just a few highly impactful tasks each day.
Okay, so it's quality over quantity.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's something that I've been trying to implement more in my own life
hmm
because I used to be a huge to-do list person.
Right.
Like I would have this like massive list and I would feel so accomplished when I would like check things off. But then I realized that like a lot of those things weren't actually that important.
Yeah, they weren't really moving the needle.
Exactly.
And you were probably spending a lot of time on things that didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So now I'm trying to be more intentional about like what I put on my list
Right.
and making sure that the things that are on there are actually the things that are going to make a difference.
Yeah, that's a great approach.
And then another thing that he talks about is wealth and income and how that follows the 80-20 rule as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the most fascinating applications of the principle, I think.
Yeah.
He argues that, working more hours doesn't necessarily lead to greater wealth.
Okay.
It's about leveraging your top skills and investments.
Mm.
Identifying those things that generate the most return and focusing your energy there.
And it's interesting because he ties this to the fact that like 80% of the world's wealth is held by 20% of the people.
Right.
And it's not because those people are necessarily like 10 times smarter or harder working.
Mm-hmm.
It's that they've figured out how to like really focus on the things that are going to create the most value.
Exactly. It's about leverage and focusing on those high impact areas.
Yeah. And then finally, he talks about happiness
Yeah.
and how that follows the 80-20 rule too.
Right.
So like, how can we apply this principle to our own like well-being and fulfillment?
Well, he suggests that, 80% of our happiness might come from just 20% of the people and activities in our lives.
Interesting.
So it's about identifying those things that truly bring us joy
Okay.
and making sure that we're prioritizing them.
And that might mean like letting go of some things that are draining our energy or time,
Exactly.
even if they're things that we feel like we should be doing.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because a lot of times we get caught up in like obligations and commitments
Mm-hmm.
that don't actually make us happy.
Yeah. And we end up feeling stressed and overwhelmed.
Yeah, totally. So this has been a really fascinating deep dive.
It has.
Like I feel like I'm already starting to think about my own life and work differently.
Me too.
Like just through this conversation.
Yeah.
So to kind of wrap things up,
Yeah.
what's like one final thought or question that you would leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to really take some time to reflect on your own life and ask yourself, what's that 20% that you could be focusing on to have the biggest impact?
Ooh, I like that.
Whether that's in your work, your relationships, your finances, or just your overall happiness.
Yeah, like what are the things that are truly moving the needle for you?
Exactly. And once you identify them, it's about being ruthless about prioritizing them and letting go of the rest.
It's so easy to get caught up in the minutia and the distractions.
Yeah.
But I think this is a great reminder to step back and focus on what really matters.
Couldn't agree more.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
And to all of you listening out there, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.
See you then. Bye.